France has stepped up air attacks on ISIS targets in Syria in the wake of the attacks in Paris on Friday. And Russia will intensify airstrikes in Syria too, after its intelligence chief said the attack on the Metrojet airliner that exploded over Egypt was an act of terror. Sam Jones, our defence and security editor, joins me now. Sam, how significant do you think are the latest comments from President Putin?
Well, this is the first explicit acknowledgement that there was a bomb on the Metrojet plane. We had some hints last week from the Russians that their initial position was beginning to shift. But now, with Putin coming and saying this, it very much puts the onus back onto him and Russia to start fighting terrorists in Syria and ISIS, particularly, who are the ones that others have said are to blame for the plane bombing.
Now, the rhetoric from President Francois Hollande has gone up a few notches. He's talking now about destroying ISIS. Is that realistic, though, using airstrikes alone, do you think?
No, I think most people are clear that the military effort against ISIS so far has been largely about containment. And the airstrikes have played a role in doing that, but they have a lot of limitations. The main problem the anti-ISIS coalition faces is actually finding targets. So at the moment, they're very cautious when it comes to bombing civilian areas, and most of ISIS's nerve centres, most of their concentrations of forces are in civilian areas, particularly Raqqa, the city in northeastern Syria, which is their nominal capital, and Mosul in Iraq, which is Iraq's second city. Both those places are very hard to hit with bombs because they're full of civilians. And beyond that, when you're looking out further into the desert, you really need high quality reconnaissance capabilities to tell you exactly when ISIS are on the move, and that's a lot harder to do than it might seem.
Now, Mr. Hollande also met with John Kerry today to discuss how a US-led coalition could join forces with a Russian-led coalition in Syria to form a big world coalition to fight against ISIS. Is that realistic, though, do you think, given how different those countries' objectives are?
Well, there's been a great deal of rhetoric in the past few days, and I think a lot of this is about the West wanting to capitalise on the situation they now find themselves in with Russia, in particular as a result of the Metrojet bombing, and the need to try and galvanise some kind of political process that might solve the problem in Syria. Washington and military officials there at the Pentagon have been very clear, consistently clear, that these problems in Syria cannot be solved by military efforts alone. So everyone knows that some kind of political process is needed. The question has been, can we get Russia on the same page as the rest of us? And what is the future of the Assad regime in Syria? There are still fundamental problems, fundamental disagreements between Washington and Moscow that are probably going to make this a very fraught and long process. So in spite of all the rhetoric, and President Hollande himself is going to go to DC next week to try and firm up efforts on this, in spite of all of that, there are some real impediments here that I don't think we should ignore.
Finally, if we could just return to the security question in Paris briefly, do you think the attacks there really exposed the significant failure of intelligence?
Well, the attack was very large. There were 8 people, all of whom were prepared ultimately to lose their lives in an attack. That requires a lot of coordination, a lot of planning. We've heard some suggestion that there's an even bigger, broader network, a sleeper cell perhaps, in Belgium that was responsible for orchestrating this and then setting the people on their way. All of that implies that there should have been detection beforehand, and there have clearly been some missteps along the way. So some of the individuals involved, particularly one of the suicide bombers, Mostafa, he was well known to French security authorities. He was on something called he had something called an S file, which is an indication that he was a radical, and he's had that since 2010. Some of the others have been to Syria and returned. All of those people should have been under scrutiny by intelligence forces around Europe, and at the very least, they certainly should have rung alarm bells when they started associating with each other.
Sam, thanks very much.
Thank you.